So, it is time to talk about Disney. Now, I grew up right in the middle of the Disney Renaissance, so my childhood was pretty much all about Disney. In fact, there's only about 6 Disney movies in the animated canon that I don't like. But there was one in particular that I found myself rewatching a lot when I was 5. Sleeping Beauty is seen as a classic nowadays, but it didn't actually do that well when it was first released.
And you're not offended, Your Excellency?
Critical response was meh, and the production was so intense that it nearly bankrupted the Disney studio. It was greenlit in 1951 and not actually released until 1959. And what film was released right before it was greenlit?
It'll do magic, believe it or not. Bibbidi-bobbidi-boo.
Cinderella was a smash hit that put Disney back on the map during the 50s. The war years saw Disney taking a step back from producing feature-length animation, and they instead focused on war propaganda shorts, or else these little package films that we haven't really heard of these days. Cinderella was the studio's most profitable film since Snow White, and it led to them producing a whole string of other beloved animated films in the 50s. But compare Cinderella to the films that came before, and it looks very safe. There aren't a lot of artistically inspired moments that you'd find in the likes of Snow White, Pinocchio, or Bambi, and there's almost none of the darkness you find in them either. The story is virtually conflict-free, and there's a lot of emphasis on the comedy side characters. So while the film did have some great moments and was seen as a return to form for the studio, Uncle Walt wanted to do better, and Sleeping Beauty was born from an unlikely source. Fantasia is seen as the black sheep of the films made while Walt was still alive. It's 2 hours of classical music set to animated shorts. It was an attempt at shaking off the belief that animation was just a shallow children's medium, and while it was seen as a masterpiece, the low box office return compared to the production costs meant that it was seen as a disappointment. And what proved to be a box office hit? These numbers told Walt that safe, family-friendly fare sold well, while experimental artistic projects did not. But what if he could combine the two? Sleeping Beauty was a merger of the experimental artistic style of Fantasia and the family-friendly fairy tale of Cinderella. The animation was the most detailed ever seen at the time. The typical backdrop for an animated film would take 1 day to finish. The ones in Sleeping Beauty took on average 7 days. So you can see why it was in production for so long. But there's actually one other detail that makes Sleeping Beauty different than the other films that came before it. Walt really wanted to make Cinderella seem like a feminist character. He even went on to talk about the character's independence, saying that she didn't just wait around for her prince to come to her, she went right over to the palace and got him. If you want a really good analysis on the feminism of Cinderella, check out this great Screen Prism video on her. But Sleeping Beauty could be considered the most feminist Disney movie of Walt's day. We'll go in alphabetical order, so let's start with Aurora first. She's typically the scapegoat for people who attack the Disney princesses for being anti-feminist. And sure, on paper, she's under an enchantment for half the movie, and she has to be saved by a kiss from a man, who she then marries. She also has the least amount of screen time of any Disney princess. Her last line in the movie comes at the 39-minute mark.
Oh no! No!
And of course, the detail that really pisses people off. Despite all this surface-level feminist hate, Aurora is actually one of the most popular Disney princesses, at least from a marketing point of view. A 2016 poll ranking the popularity of Disney's heroines had Aurora placing 3rd, behind Cinderella and Elsa from Frozen. This put her ahead of the feminist-friendly favourites like Belle and Mulan, and although 90% of the internet tells me not to, I really like Aurora as a character.
Oh, you darlings!
Mary Costa brings a real sense of dignity, grace, and authenticity to the role, and she's so good as Aurora that you almost forget that she doesn't have as much screen time. I could instantly buy why Philip falls in love with her at first sight and why the fairies are so keen to protect her her whole life. I don't think Aurora is a bad or useless character at all. I think the main problem is that there just isn't enough of her. The movie does raise some interesting points with her character that it unfortunately doesn't go too deep with. For example, there's her reaction to the big reveal.
How could I marry a prince? I'd have to be a princess. And you are, dear.
To me, these tears seem less like not being able to see a boy again, and more like finding out that her entire life has been a lie, and now she's expected to go run a country. You have to wonder if they even got around to telling her about the curse. The movie does seem like it's suggesting that maybe Aurora doesn't want to become a princess. Despite freaking out when she's told the truth, Aurora still goes to the castle with the fairies. And it looks like she's going willingly. She seems as though she's accepted her fate, even if she doesn't really want to. That honestly shows a lot of inner strength, and there are other hints in the movie to Aurora being stronger than she looks. Take this moment right before she pricks her finger.
Don't touch anything!
It looks like she's able to resist Maleficent's mind control, even for only a moment. Walt actually intended for her to be less of an ingenue than Snow White and Cinderella, and it definitely shows in her scenes with Philip. Aurora meets a boy she likes, and she doesn't run away with him. She just makes arrangements to get to know him better later. And not in a secluded corner of the forest, but in her house, where she'd expect her aunts to be there as well.
Just wait till you meet him.
All these elements point to a very strong and potentially interesting character that sadly just gets overshadowed by the more exciting presences in the film.
I'd like to turn her into a fat old hot tub.
Now, dear, that isn't a very nice thing to say.
But what about the other main Aurora criticism?
Well, here's your precious princess.
Aurora is attacked for being a damsel in distress, which, sure, she kind of is. She's under an enchantment and needs to be rescued from it, but she doesn't end up in distress from her own stupidity or weakness. She's cursed by literally the most powerful being in the film.
Thinking you could defeat me, the mistress of all evil.
Maleficent is so powerful that not even the three fairies can stop her directly, so Aurora falling under her spell doesn't make her less competent or weaker than anyone else in the film. And a damsel in distress is not sexist in and of itself. It's just a character that needs to be rescued. It's only sexist if that's the only female representation in the movie.
Well, a bonfire won't stop Maleficent.
Of course not. But what will?
There's a blogger called the Unshaved Mouse. In his review of Sleeping Beauty, he pointed out that the cast was almost entirely female. Hardly any of them were conventionally attractive or sexualized in some way. Their gender was incidental and doesn't affect their competency, and they work with each other as opposed to squabbling or catfighting. Well, you know, really.
Now, look what you've done.
If you want to, you could consider the three fairies the true protagonists of the story. And since the Unshaved Mouse wrote his review back in 2012, Hollywood produced Mad Max Fury Road, a film where the title character is a decoy protagonist and the plot is driven by the female characters. This was one of many ways that Walt wanted Sleeping Beauty to be distinct from its predecessors. And funnily enough, the original plans for the three fairies were for them to be identical single-minded triplets. Thankfully, we ended up with three very unique and distinctive characters who are all entertaining and badass in their own way. And keep in mind that this was the 1950s, way before second wave feminism had really taken off. The fantasy genre has historically been a great way for female characters to break out of their strict gender roles and be more than just damsels or love interests. L. Frank Baum's series of Oz books were very female-driven and featured women as the main power players. The Lord of the Rings featured the revolutionary character of Éowyn, a princess who disguises herself as a man, fights in battle, and eventually slays the Witch King.
I am no man.
And we could thank Buffy the Vampire Slayer for making the action girl a mainstream thing.
What's the matter? All that killing and you're afraid to die?
Disney's Sleeping Beauty shows the fairies driving the plot. They keep Aurora safe from Maleficent for 16 years without magic.
You mean live like mortals? For 16 years? Uh-huh.
When Philip is captured, they find him and rescue him and give him what he needs to defeat Maleficent.
Hurry! Hurry, Philip!
Merryweather even gets a little badass moment where she turns Diablo to stone. Even aside from these cool moments in the third act, the fairies have all distinct personalities and characteristics. Flora is a no-nonsense leader, Fauna is a caring sweetheart, and Merryweather is a feisty tomboy. Take note of the fact that Merryweather is less conventionally feminine than the other fairies. This doesn't make her more or less competent than them. And also, Flora wanting Aurora to have a pink dress doesn't undermine her competency either. None of them are impossibly flawless either. They're allowed to mess up and make mistakes, while also learning from them to save the day. Although it's Philip who delivers the killing blow, he wouldn't have been able to get there without help from the fairies. But let's get to the main reason everyone loves this film.
Now shall you deal with me, O Prince, and all the powers of hell!
So what makes Maleficent so great?
How quaint, even the rabble.
You have a female villain here who is not motivated by one of the following: jealousy, a desire to become young and beautiful again, or revenge for something a man did to her. She's not a woman-scorned, vain sorceress, femme fatale, or any other sexist stock character. Not that these characters are sexist in and of themselves, it all depends on how they're used. Maleficent is phenomenally powerful, far more so than any Disney villain before her. It's a popular fan theory that the little slip-ups that lead to her discovering Aurora were actually her curse ensuring that it would be fulfilled. She's always 2 steps ahead of everyone else, and she's way too smart to set up her own demise, like, say, the Evil Queen. Disney recognises Maleficent's status as one of the most powerful villains in the canon. In the Fantasmic show at Disneyland, although it's the Evil Queen who leads the villains, Maleficent is shown to be the most powerful weapon in her arsenal, and the fight with her dragon form makes up the climax of the show. In the Kingdom Hearts video game series, where all the Disney villains band together, Maleficent is shown as their leader.
The true darkness!
So Maleficent's legacy speaks for itself, and she's not shown as more redeemable just because she's female. We tend to think of female characters as more innocent, or if they're evil then they're more redeemable than men. And that's really a very sexist belief when you think about it. Sleeping Beauty has no problem with showing Maleficent as 100% genuine evil, and that's one of the reasons she's so beloved. She doesn't really have much of a reason or a motive, she's just shamelessly evil.
Oh, they're hopeless. A disgrace to the forces of evil.
Sometimes that doesn't work, but it definitely does here. So I get people asking me who my favourite Disney character is.
Under the sea. Under the sea.
Nope. No.
Has a life, has a spirit, has a name.
Close, but no.
No carrots.
Yep.
Well, of course. You said so yourself. Once upon a dream.
For me, Philip was the first character I could really look up to. Sure, he doesn't have as much to do as, say, Aladdin, Hercules, Tarzan, or whoever, but look at the 2 princes that came before him. In both Snow White and Cinderella, the prince is just a plot device to facilitate the happy ending. This is mainly because the animators were having trouble drawing a realistic human male, and in fact many of Philip's scenes came from things that were meant for the prince in Snow White. For example, the villain capturing him and locking him in the dungeon. By the time Sleeping Beauty came around, the animators were much more confident, and Philip gets a lot more to do. He properly has to work hard for his happy ending and be involved in the climax. So for me, Philip was my first role model for what a hero could really be. And tying into the movie's feminist themes, Philip is shown to have his own strengths without taking power from anyone else. And the movie doesn't make him useless in order to prop up the strength of Maleficent or the fairies. The fairies need Philip to stop Maleficent and break the curse, but Philip wouldn't be able to get as far without the help of the fairies.
The sword of truth flies swift and sure, that evil die and good endure.
This is a work from the 1950s showing men and women fighting side by side to save the day, without making a big deal about it and just letting it be. And that's one of the main reasons why I love this film so much. As I said earlier, Sleeping Beauty nearly bankrupted the Disney studio when it came out. And if they didn't have Disneyland up and running, who knows how the animation department would have survived. But as the Unshaved Mouse said, there are no unsuccessful Disney classics. Nowadays the film is seen as a masterpiece. For me, it's 50% the quality animation, and 50% the great characters and themes all rolled up into one.